The final panel this morning is going to be focused on building community resilience. And first we're going to hear from Sophie Payne and Carol Jeffers about the Sarasota County Building Resilience Against Climate Effects Initiative. That's BRACE. Love a good acronym. Sophie Payne is a community health planner with the Florida Department of Health in Sarasota County, and her work focuses on areas where urban planning and public health overlap. Carol, meanwhile, is a state program coordinator for community-based disaster coalitions, the director of the Medical Reserve Corps of Sarasota, and is responsible for the vulnerable populations planning for the Florida Department of Health here in Sarasota. They're going to speak first, and then we're going to hear from Stevie Freeman-Montes, who will discuss the City of Sarasota's climate adaptation planning process. Stevie is the sustainability manager for the City of Sarasota, and her responsibilities are conducting a climate change vulnerability assessment, facilitating energy efficiency upgrades for city facilities, and collaborating on code improvements related to sustainability. And then the last person is Jason Lichty, who's going to present on building community resilience in Southeast Florida. Jason is the environmental projects coordinator with Broward County, and he manages environmental policy and legislative issues and contributes to many of the county's climate change and energy initiatives. And he serves on the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact Steering Committee and as the Compact's policy and legislative coordinator. So let's welcome our first speakers, Sophie Payne and Carol Jeffers.
Hello, I'm Sophie Payne.
Good morning, everybody. I'm CJ. I go by CJ, so.
Yes, so I've been working on this project, BRACE, for about 6 months. Oh, excuse me, sorry. And CJ has been on this project for 2.5 years. So she's our veteran here, and we're going to be discussing with you what we've achieved so far, and our current work with BRACE, and how this resiliency plan has, or a project rather, has what we hope to achieve from it. And thank you for joining us today. At its most basic level, BRACE is meant to improve the public sector's response to weather impacts to public health, and it's with a particular focus on vulnerable populations. This disaster resiliency project exists in 17 states at this point. As you can see, many of these states are coastal, some of them are in the interior, and it's all funded by the CDC. And this project aims to help communities plan for events, disaster events, to lessen the impacts from weather-sensitive health outcomes, and also increase the public awareness of weather-sensitive health outcomes. The weather stressors that we've included in our project that we're particularly focused on are hurricanes, other storms, sea level rise, flooding, drought, extreme heat, and wildfires. All of these are relevant to Sarasota County. And in the county, for those who may be outside of the county today, is a Southwest Florida coastal community, and we have about 100,000 residents as of yet, but we are growing, as you've seen in other presentations today, and 32% of us are over 65, 11% have one or more disabilities, and 11% receive SNAP benefits. So this is also known as food stamps, and many live alone. So you have quite a number of people that are vulnerable. And to further this, we also have a diverse population groups in Sarasota County. We may have limited English proficiency, we may have possible social isolation, cultural, maybe trust challenges, and all of this with the fact that in a 2014 survey, 65% of Sarasota residents report that they had financial stress, and this may cause people to make trade-offs when deciding between how to allocate their money, whether it goes to efforts for disaster preparedness or more immediate needs. And in Sarasota County, we're vulnerable to many different types of hazards. And with the county's low coastal topography and high water table, outlying barrier islands, it's particularly susceptible to flooding and storm surge. In fact, the lowest lying area in the south of the county also has the highest population in the municipality of Northport. And Additionally, the highest number of vulnerable population groups lives there, and there's a lack of services typically that are medical or transportation related. So it kind of compounds the issue, particularly in south of the county. We also have determined through our project thus far some of the particular diseases that Sarasota County is susceptible to as weather may change in the future, or as we have certain effects of our weather. If you look at this chart, for example, if we have any rising temperatures, it will likely occur that we have extreme heat, and then we'll have to be more concerned about heat-related injuries and all the health effects that would come from that. The diseases we found to be most relevant to Sarasota County because of these weather effects were cancer, asthma, heart disease, respiratory disease, nutritional deficiencies, strokes, and mental health. And CJ wanted to relate how weather impacts businesses actually and their potential losses.
Well, yeah, because one of the things that we're looking at, as we look at our vulnerable populations across Sarasota County and developing disaster plans that encompasses not only their needs, but the needs of everyone in the county. One of the things that often gets overlooked is the impact on a weather event to a business. Everyone have heard about your business continuity plans, right? Some kind of emergency plans for a business or agency, but people forget that people run the agency. So if something happens, let's take the most common thing that Floridians think about, hurricanes. Just for this example, but I want you to remember that we're talking about all hazards, not just a hurricane. How many tornadoes we had touched down this year into Sarasota alone, right? But let's take a hurricane because everyone can relate to that. You had a hurricane. Matthew, anybody? Matthew kind of scared quite a couple people. It came kind of close, right? I was actually deployed for Matthew up the eastern seaboard. So you have a hurricane, it impacts your business. So now hurricane is coming and you got to prepare your business and your shutters and all that kind of stuff. Have you made any effort to prepare your staff for them to take care of their family and their home so that after the storm, when you need to reopen, or if you are an agency or business that has to kind of function during the event, have you provided your staff with the tools and capability to prepare their home, to have peace of mind, to come to work when you need them to be at work and be at work? Because I can physically show up to work, but all I'm worried about is my pet at home, my elderly parents that I'm now taking care of at home. You understand what I'm talking about? So one of the things that not only are we looking at the residents, we're also looking at what are our business and agencies and faith-based community organizations and civics and cultural, what is happening on that front to make sure that you actually get people to come back, because we all know the statistics, right? That many businesses that close due to a disaster or event do not come back. So we're trying to help prevent that. And we're gonna, in a minute, towards the end, we'll come back and tell you about what we're trying to do and get you engaged and involved in that process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. During this vulnerability analysis, we've also been talking about vulnerable populations, and this is how we broke them down. Can I see a show of hands for anyone that serves any of these groups in their own agency? Yeah? I'm sure the longer you look, the more you'll see. It applies to a lot of different people, and some of this may be also surprising. We have elders living alone, and that's expected, but we also have Barrier Island residents, which sometimes you would think they may be able to financially take care of themselves, but it's still very geographically vulnerable, so we include them in this list. Another interesting group on here is the asset limited income constrained employed, ALICE. This is pertaining to families that are working, but still with the financial stress that they're under, make it difficult to just afford the basic necessities. During our spatial analysis, we've gone over lots of different data pertaining to critical infrastructure, transportation and medical facilities, potential storm surge, and current SCAT hurricane evacuation pickup points for the homeless. We have a series of maps relating to this, and we've been able to relate that to where vulnerable populations live in order to better serve them during any of these hazardous events. And as a reminder, a lot of the vulnerable populations live in South Ithaca County, where it's most likely to flood. And during our workshops, we've had 2 workshops in the past. We've engaged with agencies that serve the vulnerable populations in Sarasota County. During our first one, we mainly focused on our current programs and how to address existing gaps and what the challenges may be. And the second one was more solution focused as far as how many people need certain types of assistance and how to provide that assistance. We also discussed how to improve communications, emergency evacuation plans, functional emergency preparedness exercises, and what agencies were actually missing from the discussion in the workshop. Well, you wanted to discuss how to, we're talking about the MRC. Okay, so in addition to with our last workshops, we came out with a better relationship with Sarasota's community organization, Active in Disaster. They're dedicated to serving disaster survivors. We also gained support from the Suncoast Disaster Healthcare Coalition, and they got on board with addressing the vulnerable population groups that we mentioned and their specific needs. We also had support from the Sarasota County's emergency management, and they agreed to put funding towards promotion of promote education, and they also were collaborative emergency relief during disasters, and they also allowed us access to reach others with their context with the BRACE message.
Okay. So what we're looking at right now, we're now, I guess you could say, in our 3rd phase of this disaster-based whole community, all hazards planning. And what we're doing right now is a health impact assessment, but with a twist. It's completely focused on disaster preparedness of residents in the community. So you will start to see the signs popping up all over the community. We have actual printed copies in our lobby at our table for that survey. We also, you can go on SurveyMonkey and do it. We're trying to get as many people in the county at all levels of finances, all levels of jobs. It doesn't government, non-government, it doesn't matter. If you're a resident or work here in Sarasota County, we're trying to get a response from you. So it will help us to improve the plans. Because the bottom line is many times we create plans from best practices, right? You hear that a lot, right? But we never actually interact or speak to the people for whom we're trying to write the plan. So my goal is to write plans that actually reflect the existing needs of the people from your level and from your viewpoint. That said, we are also trying to interview anyone that lived through Hurricane Charley, particularly if you had to leave your home. So if you know of anyone that had to leave their home due to Hurricane Charley or was engaged in that process, could you please get them in contact with us? We're doing actual live interviews because we're trying to capture those stories and capture the transportation and information challenges that they had during that time so we can better prepare for the next time. Also, through a Medical Reserve Corps grant, we have provided all hazard survival and active bystander training to the whole community. It's no cost. We're trying to get to as many churches, businesses, homeowners associations, libraries. We're literally bringing the training to you where you are. It's not where you have to come to us. We have flyers out there. We have a sheet to sign on if you want to give us some information for a group. Maybe you're a part of a group. Maybe you have a group of friends that get together and play, I don't know, bridge, whatever you play, Monopoly. But, you know, we are willing to come and do the training for you because as part of it, we're giving first aid kits we're giving away some first aid kits today in a raffle, but not that one. There's another one that has more trauma type stuff in it. The active bystander training came out of the Boston Marathon bombing because people were there dying from bleeding, and all these bystanders about, but nobody knew to just put some pressure on it. So we hope you get engaged. Visit us at our booth. You get some more information, and we really appreciate you listening to us today. And I'll let Sophie wrap it up.
Yes, thank you. So come to our table with any questions you may have, and really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. And we really hope to engage with you and involve you in the process of our BRACE project.
Thank you.
Good morning. Whew, it's loud. I'm well aware that I'm one presentation away from lunch, so I'll try to get you on board here and try to relay my enthusiasm for this project. Again, I'm Stevie Freeman Montez, the Sustainability Manager at the City of Sarasota. I've been on this job for about a year and a half, and I'm really, really excited to be here today to tell you about this project. It's by far my favorite project that I get to work on. It's a issue that I'm really passionate about for a lot of different reasons. But I think it's really, really exciting that the City of Sarasota is embarking on it. This is our first effort to really overlay climate change and climate projections in our planning processes in this route. So I first want to call out the one commissioner we have present, Vice Mayor Freeland Eddy, and thank her and our elected officials for unanimously doing this type of work. So thank you. Because that's huge. To be able to have that support at that level, it means the world. So we're really happy to have that. Where I got really interested and passionate about this work is I was fortunate enough to be living on the island of Yap in the Federated States of Micronesia for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer about 10 years ago. Really privileged, exciting experience where I worked on a marine protected area and saw locally what their island was going through during my work on the marine protected area related to coral bleaching, and also being able to see how the community lived in such a low impact way with a lot of no electricity, low building materials, low impact, and that they were experiencing such dramatic sea level rise and coral bleaching impacts from this industrialization of the world. And it really hit home for me and has inspired me continuously to make that connection on our impacts and our lifestyles to other island nations and to other people in general. And so although today I'm talking about the climate adaptation work we do, I also want to call out that the City of Sarasota does have an active climate change mitigation, our greenhouse gas reduction effort. We have Jeff Redenberg here, who worked on our greenhouse gas inventory community-wide, looking at and understanding better how we can understand our greenhouse gases and make policy decisions that decrease them. So here today, I'm strictly here to tell you about our adaptation planning process and where we're at with it, and kind of shout it from the mountains that we're doing it. Let me see if I can get this. So the purpose of this specific planning process is to improve the city's understanding of our climate-related risks to public infrastructure. So we're trying to understand how can we continue to provide public services into the future. We provide probably what everybody wants to, the most important public service is probably wastewater treatment, right? Everybody says if everything else fails, just make sure our wastewater gets treated and gets pumped. We have our potable water pumping and services, of course, our transportation, our stormwater, very critical systems that we are in charge of. So how can we look into the future at what climate projections are saying and ensure that we are being resilient and taking those into consideration more and more? So we're going to identify strategies to critical infrastructure and we're going to identify adaptation strategies to critical infrastructure and natural system. We'll also, hopefully through the end of this process, have a wealth of knowledge to be able to provide to the public, residents, developers, businesses, what our stance is, what science we're using, and be able to have a really clear understanding to move forward on. And really what's an exciting outcome of the city's climate adaptation plan is that we're improving and really elevating the climate literacy of city staff and our comfort level of integrating climate data into city decision making. And that's been really important and something that I think will be continued to be refined over time. This is just a visual of the planning steps. We are at step 1. Last week, I was in front of our city commission where I relayed the results of this step 1. And step 1 was really to look at all the science, do a thorough literature review where we understood what was out there and what is being said in the science that is going to happen for City of Sarasota. And so there's a lot out there already. We just needed to kind of clarify it, condense it, and take a stance and say, these are the projections as of today we're going to use for this planning process. So it was a very important foundational step in all of this that all other steps are going to be built off of. And so, I also have to mention that the City Commission did unanimously approve some of the use of our deep water funds to do this project, a small sliver of them. So it was financed through the oil spill funds, which I think is quite ironic, but a good fitting way to use the funds. And we went through a RFP process, and we have HDR as a kind of consultant team that is advising us at the city. So they have a climatologist, meteorologist on board, environmental engineer, wastewater engineer, and Chris Sherrick here is from HDR, who's kind of part of that team and is helping advise city staff. And we have also a city staff team that's working on it, from public works, stormwater engineer to utilities, neighborhood planning, neighborhoods. So we have and our transportation engineer, we have like a robust city internal team that's working on this as well. So we have this first step. Next step is we're currently identifying city infrastructure that we want to analyze. And then our step after that will be to conduct the vulnerability assessment, where we overlay those climate projections onto the infrastructure that we want to make sure is looked at closely. We'll also integrate some qualitative interviews from city staff and residents where we already know there's issues happening, perhaps with flooding or high tide days and things like that, where we can integrate some of the interview data with our infrastructure data. We'll prioritize the vulnerabilities and then identify adaptation strategies for our greatest vulnerabilities. And all of that will feed into a plan. And later I have the key public outreach and input moments on each of these. This is just the literature review visual of some of the documents that we looked at. I wanted to very quickly try to go over the observed and projected data. This is really important because we did look at the historical rate related to sea level rise, precipitation, storm events, extreme heat days, and storm surge, and trying to understand what is just without any modeling, these are just facts and figures, temperature readings, tidal gauge readings, what is the historical and observed data related to this. And many of you have seen, I'm sure, this visual, but we have our closest tidal gauge at St. Petersburg, which is local data saying what sea level rise we have experienced here locally in our region, and it shows since 1947 a 6.5, 6.6 inches in rise. And so our baseline that we're using through our adaptation planning process just strictly extends that rate. We know at least we're going to be seeing this rate of change in our lifetime, and so that's not taking into account necessarily any warming in the future. We just know that at this level, we can use this observed data and move from there. And then this is the global rate of change, which is, I think, a little over 8 inches. And so it's important that everybody know we have local data, and the rate that we are going to be utilizing in our projected sea level rise scenarios incorporates our local, regional data into it, and the rate of change. This is a little bit of a confusing, I think, graph, but really what it's saying is it's getting to extreme precipitation. And if you see, for example, in 2013, let's see if this works. 2013 right here on the X and Y axis is 30%. So this is saying 30% of the annual rainfall in 1 year, 30% came from one event. And so it's trying to tell us how severe and extreme precipitation is for us. And as you can see, there's been an increase in extreme precipitation events, and that has impacts to our stormwater systems and other systems. So this is one observed data that we're watching closely as well to understand how more intense rain events could impact us. This right here is temperature data based on the Bradenton temperature gauge. And as you can see, so this is just 5 miles east of Bradenton. They have from 1967, I believe it is, data, and we have a 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit increase locally. And so that's also, this rate of change is input into what we're looking at. So now we go to projections. We have observed data, and then we have projections. Projections are where we're using different models, and we have different inputs into it. And so this is the rate of sea level rise that we're using for the city of Sarasota planning process, and that the city commission kind of approved for use of last week. And it's going off of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I think it is. You can see there's 4 rates of change. There's the baseline, there's the intermediate low, they call it, intermediate high, and then the highest scenario. And this is important. We decided to use NOAA curves because it's a very transparent, defensible methodology, and that it tied to the National Climate Assessment, and it's also been recommended by local Tampa Bay Regional Planning or Regional Science Advisory Panel and some local scientists. And so we thought it was important to tie our scenarios and what we use in the planning process to very transparent, defensible sea level rise data. So that's why we chose this. The low curve extends out the historical rate, like I said, which we know isn't going to be accurate because we've already seen a higher rate. The intermediate low incorporates ocean warming, but not ice sheet loss. Intermediate high incorporates warming, ocean warming, and some ice sheet loss based on what scientists have seen already. And the high is ocean warming and the maximum amount of ice sheet loss that scientists thought possible by the end of the century. So there's kind of emission scenarios worked into all of these. The climate projections we're going to use for the City of Sarasota project also include 50 to 60 additional days over 95 degrees a year. And this one is quite shocking, but really it's when you look at our mean temperature hovering at about 91 degrees already in the summer months, that when you add 3.5 to 5.5 by 2 degrees of increase in air temperature, it kind of puts us over that trigger point of 50 to 60 additional days over 95. And this is important from a social equity and public health point of view because that difference between 90, 91 to 95 in the science really it means a lot for public health, and air conditioning being more of a necessity than just a convenience at that point. And then water temperature is something very important too to look at and what that impacts has for us. Storm surge is a little harder, but we are looking at it closely more from the level of adding sea level rise to storm surge. This picture is by Larry Stoltz and is not tied to a storm surge event, just a king tide event, an extremely high tide event. And this picture on the right is Hurricane Hermine, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but at a low tide. But we will be looking at that as well. So we're utilizing 5 to 10% increase in extreme precipitation events. The same potential for drought. Future hurricane conditions is still not quite known from some of the science how that's gonna play out. And greater potential for higher storm surge based on sea level rise, and then of course for flooding. We're specifically looking at this type of infrastructure, so lift stations, treatment plants, pipes, major outfalls. You know, this is kind of getting into the weeds, I know, but it's important because all these systems are interconnected, and we're trying to get into that technical level of what will we do at certain points of time when a life cycle of an infrastructure is up. What are our choices, and what will we do, and how will we integrate all this information? So right now we're going through the vulnerability assessments. We're going to have vulnerabilities identified, and where we really hope to get a lot of public input, and I hope you all will stay in touch with me over time, is prioritizing those vulnerabilities, because we have the physical prioritization, but we also have a very important social equity and cultural prioritization, and we need a lot of help understanding how we're going to prioritize our vulnerabilities. And then also a lot of input will be needed for the adaptation strategies. This is just a summary. I'm getting my time up. But I wanted to end on the regional collaboration because I think it's really important to share that we are working closely with Town of Longboat, City of Northport, City of Venice, Sarasota County, Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. We're starting to meet locally to understand what each other are doing around this issue and sharing lessons learned from each other. And of course, MOAT has been a partner in a lot of different ways, and Estuary Programs doing a vulnerability assessment. So I think there's just a lot of regional momentum, and I'm really excited to share that City of Sarasota is part of it. And if you would love to stay updated, please come introduce yourself to me, and I'll write it down. You can call me or email me anytime or visit our website as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning, barely. And I am standing between you and lunch, so I really have the unenviable task of being the last speaker. I also have the unenviable task of following all the other speakers this morning who've been excellent, particularly Craig Pittman. I'm looking forward to reading his book because I'm sure Broward punches above its weight in terms of the craziness. Just a real quick story, which is an environmental one. Someone in the 1970s said it was a great idea to dump about 1 million tires off the coast of Broward County, tied together with steel bands to create artificial reefs. And most people probably realize that steel rusts in water. So those bands broke, those tires went loose, and many of them are not, well, they're all spread out over a huge area now of our offshore ecosystem, and many of them are loose and have been basically, every time there's a storm, and then bashing our natural coral reefs and damaging them severely. So we're currently trying to yank as many of those out of the ocean as we can, but since they're no longer tied together, I'm wondering if that made the book, because I think it'd be a good story. I'm also have the unenviable task of trying to spray a huge fire hose of information at you. There's a tremendous amount of going on in Southeast Florida, not just my county, Broward, but throughout the region. I'll talk a little bit about the Compact, which is our regional effort to work together on climate issues. I can barely keep up with what's going on in my division, the county, all the other counties. So I'm trying to do my best to explain this information in the next 10 to 12 minutes. And you'll see a lot of slides that are very text heavy. Please don't fear that I'm going to read through them. I hope you know I can do that. But I wanted to give folks a chance to dig a little bit more deeply into that. So first we'll talk about a little bit about the Compact, which is this network that we created and the process that it involves a little bit. Relevancy here in this region. In fact, having these workshops have this network there already is a tremendous sign and really speaks talent and dedication of folks in this area. Then I'm going to get a little bit into some specific outcomes efforts that are undertaking right now. I don't need to go over this too much because you realize all the types of climate threats that creates, but sometimes they're not as well known. We need some context. Really, again, for example, the sea level rises cause the salt water to its own crowd in itself. The drinking water wells, what it also does is pushes the groundwater up. And all of a sudden, before you had any in the surface of the earth, the water table 6 feet. All of a sudden the water table moved up 3 feet, now you have 3 feet less soil to absorb rainwater. So you're flooding even inland, miles and miles and miles from the coast. Here's a video to play here. I just wanted to show, this is from a King Tide event last year of a boat ramp in Hollywood. I hear the audio. All right, well, imagine the water flowing over up this boat ramp. And then the camera pans around, and it's a neighborhood, and it's people's streets, and there's now 6 inches of water and coming up people's driveways. And this is in a neighborhood of Hollywood called Hollywood Lakes, which is a lot of frontage. And this is not an uncommon thing. This is something we're facing every King Tide season. Here we go. So instead of being boat ramp, put your boat in the water, now it's ramp. It's just like, the water's just flowing. And this, of course, is salt water. This is the intercoastal. And you can imagine what that does to folks' cars. We just had probably one of the most severe King Tide events we've yet had, I think, was in October. Because of there was the other hurricane that was offshore pushing water, towards the shore. it's all kind of about the timing and the way the waves are going, but we've got some serious issues that we're already facing. Again, I don't know as much about the Sarasota region, but I'm sure you've had some of those conditions as well. And it's something we're realizing that could be every day by 2030, 2040, if we don't take some corrective action. So one of the solutions that or one of the processes and networks that we created to help to deal with this in our region is the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, which has a lot of different kind of meanings, which I'll unpack a little bit. But really what it is a regional collaborative among the 4 counties of the region, from the Keys all the way up to Palm Beach County. They said 6 million people, 109 municipalities. Many other stakeholders are involved as well, universities, businesses, et cetera. And we work together on both sides of the climate equation, both the mitigation, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction side, as well as the adaptation. Said it was going to unpack it. Here's an overstuffed suitcase. So the compact is actually a lot of different things, depending on the kind of the context. I'm going to run through these a little bit quickly. I mentioned it was a regional collaborative. That's kind of the most common usage of the term. When you hear it, it refers to that kind of collective effort. But strictly speaking, it's a document that was signed by the 4 counties back in 2009 and 2010 that kind of governs, but set down some goals and things for us to cooperate on. That's been the basis for our work. Basically, county commissioners saw each other in Washington, D.C. when they were lobbying about similar issues, and they decided this is insane that we're not working together, and it grew out of that. It's a set of working relationships. Collaboration, that kind of both general, but more specifically, it's about working relationships among people. The staff steering committee, which is comprised of representatives from each of the counties, 4 municipalities, 1 from each county, which rotates sort of on a regular basis, and related staff. We get together in person on a regular basis. We have phone calls on a regular basis. We have spin off into working groups and subcommittees that work together on specific projects and issues. And out of that have come quite a few collective results. We've done some regional data and planning, which I'll talk about, series after series of workshops. We do annual summits, except this year when the hurricane canceled it, unfortunately. That was not fun. Our poor friend, we had to take our poor friend in Palm Beach County out to dinner because she was so traumatizing. We worked on grant applications together. So, and previously, I'm not even sure that the folks who work on environmental issues among the 4 counties or these cities knew each other that well. And now we work together so closely, I think we view each other often as extensions of the same staff. More broadly speaking, the compact is a network of, as I said, there are these working groups and things that come together on a whole host of different issues, not pulling just from the people on the staff steering committee, but also from other parts of the counties and cities and universities and whatever those topic matter experts might be. I just want to point out one thing in particular on here. We now have an official partnership with the Florida Climate Institute, which is a collaboration among many of the major research institutions in Florida that do climate-related research. They were interested in kind of helping us better, and we were interested in helping them better. Really focus on the real-world problems that we're facing and could use some help in researching, investigating. And so there's now monthly phone calls, and I actually helped to with the help of the Florida Climate Institute, helped to pull together a grant application with the University of Florida earlier this year on something. Fortunately, we didn't get it, but that partnership, having been established, made that collaboration much easier. And when you're applying for grants, sometimes there's very quick deadlines. So that's already borne fruit. We're also a community of practice. This field, this kind of work, no one's ever really done this before. This is a brand new kind of problem. And so the fact that everybody from elected officials to staff are getting together and working on this, talking through this on a regular basis, we're kind of creating this new field, if you will. As I said, we're a regional resource in many ways, particularly in the production of several baseline documents that have been really fundamental to our work. Probably the most significant is a unified sea level rise projection that is used in the 4 counties. In addition to all the input from the NOAA information and international studies of climate change and sea level rise, we basically took a lot of the experts from our region, University of Miami, Florida Atlantic University, et cetera, NOAA, locked them in a room for several times over the course of a year or something, and had them agree on a projection we could use as a region. And then we did it again 4 years later. We just finished last year an update to it. So the curves were slightly adjusted given new data, new science. But it's like here in Sarasota, mostly based on the NOAA curves. Just point out the NOAA curves are really the blue ones towards the bottom. Those are the low, intermediate, and high intermediate, and the NOAA high is the orange. And so we actually put together a guidance document now, which we're trying to disseminate out to municipalities, engineering firms, et cetera, on not just what are these projections, when should you use them, and in what circumstances. So, for example, if you're building a nuclear power plant, we'd suggest you use the high curve because that's going to be very vulnerable and very costly to change otherwise. And I just want to illustrate how the planning that we do not only is used by kind of organizations that are below where we're at the regional level, but also inform higher level work. We're also a model of governance that's been used everywhere from other parts of the United States to South Africa. We're a platform for policy and advocacy. We've rolled out one particular initiative called Adaptation Action Areas, which I'm going to get into here. It was during an otherwise terrible session of the legislature in terms of good planning policy going down the tubes. This was instituted, and it allows areas to, through their comprehensive plan, designate parts of their region that are subject to rising sea levels or other climate impacts, and to focus attention, potential funding on them. What we've done in Broward County is use that to work on a project that's going to create a sand bypass, basically a big hole under water just north of our Port Everglades Inlet, which right now all the sand kind of stops there and goes out to the sea and fails to nourish the beach to the south of the inlet. We're going to dig a big hole, capture that sand as it falls into it, and then periodically dredge it, drop it south of the inlet, and allow the natural movement of sand to replenish that beach. Fort Lauderdale, he's used this to target infrastructure improvements in areas that are subject to flooding and other types of sea level rise impacts. Clearly, they've done a lot of work on it because they've designated quite a few areas, but they're tying their infrastructure to that. I want to just quickly touch on one of the other projects that we've done, which is a design initiative. Charrettes, that term was mentioned, but we wanted to really tie a lot of the thinking around this to concrete examples of how you might change the infrastructure, change the built environment to deal with these challenges. You may have heard of Build by Design, which is a competition after Hurricane Sandy in New York and New Jersey to do a similar kind of thing. Well, we've taken it and made it kind of a local initiative, initially with some help from the Dutch government, which is really interested in water issues. They came and helped. The first year we did it, we sites kind of an older urban area, South Beach, which of course is high value and very dense, and then a suburban area, actually Sweetwater, which was I think the place that was founded by the circus midgets. Last year we did another set of areas, Delray Beach, Hollywood, and Key West. And this year we did another area. I have images for this, but I just want to point out this is the kind of work that's produced. This is where the Delray Beach, they're looking at 2 feet of sea level rise, mostly on their intracoastal side. How would that look if you were to adapt that barrier island? In Hollywood, they're extremely low-lying. What are you going to do with this water, especially in these low-lying areas like where that boat ramp was? One of the ideas was to take a golf course, turn it basically into a giant holding pond, a reservoir, be able to pump the water in there when it's necessary, and then slowly release it back out to the tide. And I just want to quickly mention, so for sea level rise, we're actually starting to not only push this out to municipalities and ask them to formally adopt the projections so that it starts to inform their specific work, but we in the county are requiring it to be considered in planning and budgetary decisions. We've incorporated a lot of this stuff into our comprehensive plan. We have priority planning areas for sea level rise, which looked at a 2-level, kind of bathtub level, where that flooding would occur. And if you want a land use amendment in that area, you have got to demonstrate that you are going to account for the sea level rise. You can't just get a land use amendment. You're going to have to demonstrate why you said that. It's part of our updated land use plan. We're actually now updating our very own flood map for the county because FEMA maps do not include sea level rise at all. And we think using those as a basis for planning and investment is a terrible idea. So we've actually invested our own funds in modeling not just sea level rise, but also groundwater effects and rainfall. And we're producing this map that's going to be used essentially to help guide development decisions, things like how much drainage you have to maintain on site. That's going to change those kinds of requirements. So this sort of thing is really going to drive a lot of the regulatory environment in Broward County. We're looking at a lot of alternative water supply projects, everything from Everglades restoration, of course, but also a reservoir project up in Palm Beach County that is going to help to replenish our aquifers in western Broward so that we can push back against that sea level rise. We're investing in tidal monitoring projects so we know in our own county what the situation is, and we're not relying on, say, Virginia Key and Miami-Dade's tidal projections. We're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to really look specifically at an area to see what would happen if we increased seawall heights by 2.5 feet, and how that would affect flooding and storm surge and all these kinds of things, and also the economics that are associated with those sorts of changes. Like, what are we going to protect? What are we going to, if we do this, there's no action is not an option, right? There's going to be a cost to that. So it's calculating that cost and then looking at this investment and what the loss reduction might be. And then from those sorts of decisions, those sorts of results, you can actually make the case to a county commission or a city commission that those investments are worthwhile. And then I want to briefly, this is almost my last slide, talk about what else is being done elsewhere in the compact. I obviously am Broward centric because I work there. Miami Beach is famously spending $400 million on pumps and other measures to keep their city alive. Miami-Dade County in the middle, they have a huge amount of work that they're doing on based on some resolutions that their county commission passed on everything from infrastructure to water supply, et cetera. The Keys have also done a lot of economic analysis to build a case for adaptation action there.
Thank you. So this is a specific question for Jason right off the bat. The question was, what percentage of your drinking water supply is from surface water versus groundwater?
From Broward in Broward County, 100% of our drinking water comes from the Biscayne aquifer. We have not yet. I take that back. There may be a very small amount that comes from the Floridan that's used where they use reverse osmosis treatment, but that's extremely expensive, and that's been a result of saltwater intrusion. I think it's Hallandale Beach or possibly Hollywood where they're having to do that. But we are entirely dependent on the surface water, not the surface water aquifer, but the aquifer.
Is Sarasota actively pursuing the integration of the community emergency response teams for assistance in disaster events?
Say that again, please.
Is Sarasota actively pursuing the integration of the community emergency response teams for assistance in disaster events?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that question. That is actually one of my personal pet peeves, because we've been treating, as a state, the CERT program as a catch and release. We bring a ton of people in, we train them, we give them thousands of dollars of equipment, and then nothing happens after that. So one of my personal drive and goal is I'm actually beginning to integrate the Sarasota County CERT trained people and CERT program into a joint program between the Medical Reserve Corps, the State Emergency Response Team, the Healthcare Coalition, and the community organizations active in disaster. That's actually one of my big pushes for next year. Thank you.
So the political focus is essentially to promote unrestricted, statement than a question, I guess. The political focus is essentially to promote unrestricted growth, which caused or contributed to significant bacterial and algal contamination of our coastal waters. What action will be done to address this problem, which will become worse with sea level rise here in Sarasota County?
Oh.
I'm not sure who that's for.
Can you repeat it one more time? I want to make sure I get all that in.
Basically, what action will be done to address the problem of bacterial and algal contamination of coastal waters, which will become worse with sea level rise in Sarasota County?
That's exactly what I hope will come out of this process, and why we're going through it, is to understand what's going to happen worse and what we need to do to address it. And so I don't have an answer now, but those are the types of issues that I hope will emerge as front and center to have the hard conversations so that we can develop policies and strategies to address.
And this is, I guess, kind of a question for anybody as well. How can we get more elected officials on board?
Vote for the right ones. I mean.
And I think the more community it has to be from the top down and the bottom up. So I feel like when there's that collaboration, like I hope that the city of Sarasota kind of embarking on this, even though we're not doing all things on all issues related to climate change, I hope that it will help us talk about climate change and kind of spread out. And I hope we can just continue to influence the culture, I guess.
And it's not an example from my county, but I think it was last year, maybe the year before, kind of a famous example in our region from Miami-Dade County. There was a handful of activists. It wasn't like hundreds of people showing up at their commission meeting, but a good number making a lot of noise, being squeaky wheels, and saying that the county budget did not include enough money to address sea level rise and climate change. And they made a lot of noise. Got a lot of, fair amount of press, and lo and behold, $1 million was found, and more staff was added, and that trend has only continued. I think the mayor actually, as kind of a result of that, Mayor of Miami-Dade kind of got religion, and our colleagues who work in the Office of Resilience there, I think they're hiring 3 more people in the next budget as a result of this. The budget was just passed. So be at meetings, be squeaky.
And this was also a question for Jason. How did the PACE program, which I'm not familiar with, work out over in Broward County, which made solar more affordable for your citizens that live there? So
Well,
something you're familiar with?
Sure. PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy, which is essentially a third party will provide the financing to put solar or allow you to do like windstorm improvements, hurricane windows or a new roof, certain things that are allowed on your home. And the kind of unique feature is that the repayment is done, it's actually put on your property tax bill. So it uses the county's property tax system, and when your property tax bill comes, there's also a voluntary assessment for that loan repayment. We just launched the program this summer after I probably say like 10 years of trying, and it's we went from initially having 2 vendors to now we're up to 4. We're finishing negotiations with the 3rd and the 4th. There's been a lot of interest. One of my colleagues is doing a kind of a road show to take this out to the community. One of, I guess, the interesting things, and I'm not going to say it's good or bad, it seems like most of the improvements that people are doing are actually related to making their homes, more resistant to hurricanes and wind and so forth. So roofs and windows, less so energy efficiency and solar, which as somebody who wants to see more renewable energy in Florida, that's kind of disappointing, and that's really how it got started. The CE stands for clean energy. A lot more has got kind of lumped in underneath that. But really anything that can help people become more resilient to all these challenges, and there's no shortage to choose from. I think is a good thing. So we're watching with a lot of interest, and we're doing a lot of education to try to get the word out and help people take advantage of it.
I just wanted to add on to that PACE is definitely something the city of Sarasota would love to see, and I'm not quite sure how to word it, but it is being looked at the county, and it's something that we're kind of trying to move forward, and it's definitely locally being pushed.
Well, thank you all so much for participating in the panel discussion. Thank you.